It's a pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Wendy Watson-Wright, who's with the International Oceanographic Commission, the Executive Secretary. And for those of you that aren't aware, the IOC was one of the main reasons that the international community for carbon works so well together. It's been a fantastic lot of support from IOC over the last at least 2 decades, probably longer. So, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Bronte. That's very kind, and I certainly appreciate being here. And thanks also to you, Phil, for the invitation. Delighted to be here to speak to you at this, what I was just discussing with Dick. I guess it's the GOA-ON, since nobody has said GOA-ON, which kind of rolls, but the GOA-ON, or the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. I do like GOA-ON, no? So I'd like to quickly set the stage for you, if I could, by giving you a short summary of ocean acidification in relation to the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, or Rio+20, which took place last year. I'd then like to talk a little bit about IOC's programs and initiatives related to ocean acidification before going on to highlight some possible connections between the IOC activities and the GOA-ON. And I'd like to finish just with looking a little bit to the future. So just a little reminder for those of you who may know or may not know or may have forgotten that UNESCO is the only body in the UN system that has the E for education and the S for science. Most people don't know that, but it's extremely important, I think. And that the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, or IOC of UNESCO, in fact, is the only UN body with a primary mandate in ocean science in all ocean basins of the world. I think that the IOC of UNESCO has played and is playing a very important role in supporting the management of our relationship with the ocean. And we're doing this through programs in ocean science, as I've mentioned, but also in ocean services, such as tsunami warning systems, observations, data and information exchange, and transfer of marine technology or capacity development. And I would say that the attendance and contributions of the IOC and many, many other partners at Rio+20 was instrumental in obtaining what we now have in our hands and what I think will direct future oceanographic work, and that is the Rio+20 conference document, outcome document, entitled The Future We Want. So leading up to and during Rio+20, there were several events and reports that influenced the decisions and the commitments that are stated in the final document. IOC, in collaboration with the International Maritime Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization, and the UN Development Program, led in putting together the document which is entitled A Blueprint for Ocean and Coastal Sustainability. And this was submitted as official input into the Rio+20 process. Now, the blueprint proposes a number of key actions. There are 10 in total, and these are regarded as priorities for the future in terms of their capacity to transform management of human activities in the ocean toward sustainability. Well, these are organized around 4 major objectives that supported the overall goals of Rio+20, and those are shown here. These objectives were actions to reduce stressors and restore structure and function of marine ecosystems, actions that support the blue-green economy, we called it, those that lead to policy, legal, and institutional reforms for effective ocean governance, and finally, actions supporting marine research, monitoring and evaluation, and technology and capacity transfer as a means for improving knowledge, addressing emerging issues, and developing capacities in support of sustainable use of the ocean. Now, the first main action out of the 10, highlighted here in red, is to implement urgent actions to mitigate and adapt to ocean acidification. Now, the final outcome document of Rio+20, as I said, the future we want, stresses the critical role that the ocean plays in all 3 pillars of sustainable development, and it commits to protect and restore the health, productivity, and resilience of the ocean and marine ecosystems, and to maintain their biodiversity, enabling their conservation and sustainable use for present and future generations. In fact, it contains 20 paragraphs on the ocean and additional 3 paragraphs on small island developing states, or SIDS. And 1 paragraph, that's paragraph 166, which no doubt you've all memorized by now, urges action on ocean acidification, and in fact, among other things, it reiterates the need to support marine scientific research, monitoring, and observation of ocean acidification, including through enhanced international cooperation, which is exactly the reason why we're all here in this room today. So, although the scientific community had already seen the need for an OA observing network long before, I would say, the fact that this appeared in the Rio+20 outcome document gives it the official blessing by all of the UN member states. And this is extremely important for this community, especially in light, as Jane was mentioning this morning, or earlier this afternoon, going for funding. Having this blessing is critical. So I'd like now to talk a little bit about IOC's overall activities around OA. First of all, IOC, as you've heard, is the lead organization for the coordination of the Global Ocean Observing System, or GOOS. GOOS, as we've heard, is a collaborative system of observations where the components of the system are funded by national sources. The system includes satellite observations and in situ observations, and those are shown here, as well observational or operational observing networks and sustained research funding networks and platforms. The data from these observations, of course, feeds into data management systems and the generation of products to reach users, having impacts not just on science, but on society. GOOS, as you know, encompasses both global scale and coastal observations. So I would say that having the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network well connected to GOOS makes absolute sense. Now, secondly, for the IOC and OA is on research. And as we've heard, as early as 1979, IOC and SCORE, the Scientific Committee on Oceanic Research under ICSU, recognized the importance of the ocean's role in global climate change, and it did form the first Committee on Climate Change in the Ocean, or CCCO, which in 1984 established a CO2 advisory panel. And already at that time, the panel was calling for a carbon observation program and sampling strategy, and that it was needed to determine the global oceanic CO2 inventory. The CCCO, in fact, was the precursor for the IOCCP, which we heard about earlier from Maciek. But following on that came, of course, GOOS, and then more recently the Ocean Biogeographic Information System, which I'll mention a little bit later. As well, now, with the help of the Republic of Korea, the IOC is undertaking a project on ocean carbon sources and sinks, which I'll speak to as well in a little bit. Now, IOCCP, of course, we've just heard about, and I won't repeat what Maciek has said, but it is an extremely important program for ocean carbon, and I would say for ocean acidification. And of course, its major objective is to promote the development of a global network of ocean carbon observations for research. Now, still on OA research, GOOS and IOC's Ocean Biogeographic Information System, or OBIS, which came out of the Census of Marine Life, is leading the open ocean theme of the Global Environment Facility-funded Transboundary Waters Assessment Program. Now, this will be the first global assessment of the state of transboundary waters, identifying priority areas for future GEF funding and for improved management. The Open Ocean Assessment focuses on themes where global commons or global environmental issues related to the ocean exist, and these would include things like climate, ecosystems, biodiversity, fisheries, and pollution. The outcomes will include indicators and maps of the different states of these systems through identifying local impacts on ecosystem vulnerability and on human vulnerability. Indicators will target areas of concern related to ocean acidification and its impacts on coral reef ecosystems in tropical areas and pteropods in the polar region ecosystems. And the latter will be part of a biodiversity case study which is being conducted by OBIS in conjunction with the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this research, we believe, will demonstrate the potential of the OBIS database as a key tool for research, knowledge generation, and capacity building. Now, as mentioned, another project related to the OA research under the umbrella of IOC is the project Ocean Carbon Sources and Sinks. Now, the IOC, in cooperation with IOCCP and the Ocean Carbon and Biogeochemistry Program, began this initiative in order to increase the intercomparability of shipboard biogeochemical long-term observations, or so-called ocean time series. Now, to achieve this goal, we are compiling metadata of existing time series around the world. And from this perspective, we're asking for support to expand the list of time series, and we would very much like to encourage the scientific community to join this growing network. Additionally, this project is involved in the preparation of the updated summary for policymakers coming out of the last Ocean in a High CO2 World Symposium, which was held last September in Monterey. And it functions as a link to the IOCCP, to the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, and to other OA initiatives. And I'm happy to be able to say that financial support from this project allowed us to support the participation of experts at various OA meetings and workshops, something IOC hasn't been much able to do given our current funding situation. But I'm also happy to announce that through discussions here and previously, IOC, IAEA, and SCORE will apply to host an ocean acidification side event at the upcoming UNFCCC COP19 in November of this year. So the third avenue, or the third activity of IOC in relation to ocean acidification, is advocacy and communication, again mentioned earlier today by Jane as being extremely important. One of the IOC's missions is to enhance awareness of ocean acidification, not just within the scientific community, but certainly with the public, with stakeholders, with policymakers, decision makers, and politicians. A few examples of where we tried to do this do include the previously mentioned blueprint for ocean and coastal sustainability, the ocean acidification summaries for policymakers coming out of, as I've already mentioned, the SCORE, IOC, IGBP, Ocean in a High CO2 World Symposia, the OAICC, the Coordination Center, which we heard about from Lena earlier, operated in Monaco, and IOC supports this as a member of the advisory board. And of course, the World Ocean Assessment, previously known as the UN Regular Process, where the IOC is providing technical support and which, of course, is also discussing the issue of ocean acidification. So let me move quickly to IOC's interaction with the GOA-ON. As highlighted before, assessment of the importance of ocean acidification needs soundly based observational data. This is a no-brainer for everybody here, of obviously both a biological and chemical, and social and political. And it needs this at local, regional, and global levels. Now, making the measurements is only the first step, and we need a structured system to ensure data quality and comparability, and to synthesize all the information we're gathering in a wider context. In other words, to derive knowledge for societal benefit, and this is what the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network is all about, I would say. Now, I hope the previous slides have shown how complementary the efforts of the IOC and the GOA-ON network are, in that a variety of the IOC programs and activities are in fact related to ocean acidification. And we believe, we're quite certain, and we certainly hope that in the future, the technology and capacity development, the mutual guidance and support is going to happen in close collaboration between the IOC and the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, yes, but also with all of our other partners. Is this still working? Yes, it is. Now, I have to say that I'm quite pleased that this workshop is going to try to solve some of the problems looking at standards for measuring ocean acidification in coastal areas, which, as you know, due to various influences, both anthropogenic and natural, are extremely diverse and very difficult to standardize. And accepting this challenge, I think, should especially help developing countries and small island developing states who so much depend on the ocean for their existence. And as you know, they do look to the sea for the protein that they eat, and they also have extensive coral reefs, which are economically important for fisheries, tourism, and coastal protection. Again, ensuring sustainable development of marine resources is one of the major objectives of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and we very sincerely believe that the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network community will be one of the main pillars that will help us to fulfill this goal. Now, I know you're going to be discussing this particular diagram at this meeting, and I think that's a good idea. I think it shows very well how many organizations are actually involved. I do know that there's some controversy around who's on the inner circle and who's in the outer circle, but my advice would be to make it as absolutely inclusive as possible, and probably to put everybody in the same circle or whatever kind of a shape you want to put them in. So I'd like to now move on to actually the title of my talk, and that is, why do we need a global ocean acidification observing network? In fact, I think that the answer is quite simple. We need it because we can't manage what we don't measure. Good measurement provides the basis for good management and the basis for good policy. And I don't think that it needs much more of an answer than that. But having said that, I do believe that the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network can and will be a very valuable tool to observe and quantify ocean carbon fluxes, sources, and sinks. And it will do this through creating a body of scientific and analytical expertise, through fostering effective and sustainable sampling, coordinated research plans, and common methodologies in order that all of this data, in order to ensure intercomparability, by assuring data exchange and promoting open access to ocean carbon data, and finally by encouraging international cooperation, including capacity development and technology transfer with all of the appropriate partners. In conclusion, I think we all need to align the ocean acidification methods to assure high intercomparability of measurements, to ensure a direct commitment of countries to support this network, to increase capacity development and technology transfer in order to fill the gaps that exist right now for ocean observation, to highlight the importance of the ocean sciences for human activities and for progress. And this would include providing tools and mechanisms, such as through bluing the green economy, or greening the blue economy for that matter, coastal management plans, and developing new technologies, as we've heard that the X Prize is going to be helping us to do. And we need to do this so that the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network can fulfill its role as a global observing network for OA and ecosystem response, and as a tool for the scientific community to speak with one strong voice, communicating the ocean acidification issue and raising awareness overall for ocean acidification. So I thank you very much for your attention. I certainly look forward to all the discussion here. And just before I finish, I will give an announcement, not paid, but a public announcement. I did have a note from Phil Wiles of the Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Program, who wants people to know that there will be a Pacific Islands Ocean Acidification Network meeting coming up at the end of this year or early next year. I have sent the information to Phil and asked that it be shared with everybody at this workshop. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Wendy. That was really great talk. There's probably time for one question. Is any... okay. Well, we are running late, so it'd be nice to go on to Jan. Thank you again. Jan Newton is from the University of Washington, and most of us were at the first meeting in Seattle, which Jan organised with a few others and did a fantastic job, and she's going to give us a rundown of the outcomes of that meeting. Thank you.
Great, yes. All right, well, hello everybody, and it was definitely a distinct honor to be asked by Libby Jewett and Dick Feely over a year ago to put some effort into organizing a workshop, and then to welcome global representatives of ocean acidification communities to the University of Washington in Seattle about a year ago, almost to the date. And so what I want to talk to you about is an overview of the report, which is outside, that was compiled as the results from this gathering. So going into the workshop, these were the goals of what we wanted to accomplish: to provide the rationale and design of components and locations for an international ocean acidification observing network, to identify a minimum suite of measurement parameters, to develop a strategy for data quality assurance, and to discuss requirements for international program integration. I should mention all of my slides summarizing the Seattle workshop were black and white. I gave them to Phil, who made them beautiful color and also changed some of the spelling. So thank you, Phil. So that's quite ambitious for a workshop, and I think we accomplished quite a lot of that, but we didn't accomplish everything, and that's why we're here today. So what I want to present you with is where we left off, so that we can use that perhaps as our starting point the rest of this week. So who was this Seattle workshop? Many of you in the room were there. 62 scientists from 23 countries. I note I counted up, and it was I believe 87 scientists from 29 countries this time, 9 of which are new countries, so that's a great expansion. Here's their representation and where they hailed from. So at the start of that workshop, we asked that same question that Wendy addressed: why is a global OA network needed? And really wanted to answer that before we went on with scoping any of it. And so why does it need to be global? Why can't we just all do our OA activities together? And 3 reasons we came up with. One is that we need information that can inform policy and public, and that's better done on a global basis, because if countries just do that in isolated manners, we wind up not being able to solve problems that really have a global basis. The second is that these processes are occurring at global scales. Therefore, we really have to have our network being comprehensive to those scales in order to understand its drivers and status. And then lastly, we need to be able to predict future states. And so this also needs, because it's being driven on a global basis, this needs global data in order to inform us. So those 3 reasons really then morphed into a little bit, plus or minus, our 3 goals. And so the first 2 really split the need for understanding the OA status into the understanding of the OA chemical condition itself, to identify the spatial and temporal patterns and assess the generality of response, document and assess its variation and rate of change. And then as well, as Phil mentioned earlier, to document the ecosystem response to this, so that it isn't just a physics and chemistry observing network, that it is in fact an ecosystem response observing network as well. And then thirdly, in that prediction, to be able to optimize OA modeling, so that we can use that not only for understanding future states, but also to fill in where we have gaps in terms of our observations. So those were our 3 goals. Given that, one of the things that we explored early on in the workshop that really helped a lot of our formulating how to do things, we came up with this concept that as we think about the data that this network should provide, we split it into 2 data quality objectives, which were given the name based on atmospheric community, climate and weather, where climate is data with a sufficient and defined quality to assess long-term trends with defined level of confidence. And so in OA parlance, it's to detect changes in OA state over multi-decadal timescales. As contrasted with weather, which is data of sufficient and defined quality to identify relative spatial patterns and short-term changes, so more the variability, that allows us to do mechanistic interpretation of the ecosystem response to local, immediate, and OA dynamics. And by parsing climate versus weather, it really helped us with defining how the OA network would be organized. So the network has a system design which is nested, and it's nested in a couple of different ways. One is we defined 3 different levels of measurements: critical minimum measurements, level 1, measurements for integrated assessment to enhance the interpretation, level 2. Not to say they're not important, but they give us extra information. And then level 3, measurements that are not yet fully ready for standardization. They're in development or evaluation, but they can definitely be part of this observing network. And so that's one level of nesting. Another level of nesting is that we envision there will be stations to assess goal 1, the OA status, and a subset of those stations where we assess ecosystem responses, recognizing that monitoring for ecosystem responses is typically more expensive and more complicated and can't be done at all of the stations. So that's the second level of nesting. So here's a beautiful slide that Phil put together showing the 3 goals: OA conditions, ecosystem response, and OA modeling, and then the 3 levels. And so I know you can't read everything here, and in my talk I'm just trying to give you the overview. The details are in the report. But you can see that for goal 1, level 1, carbonate system constraint, temperature, salinity, oxygen, fluorescence, and irradiance. And if I click it one more time, there's a couple of details that were really important. One is that fluorescence and irradiance have asterisks by them. We started to get wrapped around this boat. Do we need fluorescence and irradiance all the time? And some people said yes, but some people said, well, you can't do that on all platforms. And so we utilized the asterisk and said where a platform is appropriate and available, then we wanted to have those measurements. Because another thing that really emerged out of this workshop is not only understanding the OA effect on biology, but also the biology effect on OA conditions. And so therefore, fluorescence and irradiance help us to get at that. Okay, so level 2 would be things like nutrients, optics, transport, meteorology, et cetera, that help us understand these better. Oh, right, going back to level 1, carbonate system constraint. And we recognize that different people have different ways of doing this, and that it could be achieved in a number of ways, including combinations of measurements and via synthetic estimates of other parameters. But that we, and I'll show you in the next slide, needed to constrain how that was done and what the levels of uncertainty were. In goal 2, it was a little less defined in terms of level 1, level 2, because it was a bit overwhelming, and we came up with big catch-all things like biomass of functional groups in level 1, and level 2 more focus on species and processes, but with the recognition that we really wanted to revisit that, and I think that's largely one of the things we're going to be doing in this workshop. Okay, so going back to goal 1, level 1, here is how that concept of weather versus climate really pays out. So weather data, the weather objective requires a plus or minus 10% measurement resolution of omega, the saturation level, and you can read the details there. Climate requires 10 times better than that, all right? And so this is what our ocean acidification chemical oceanographers recommended for how we define goal 1, level 1. But consensus from all the group was observations provided by the network will report uncertainty in measured, estimated, and calculated parameters regardless of the quality level. And I think that will was bold before. And secondly, observations, once again, bold will, relate to a community-accepted set of reference standards. So that's how we got by the levels, different methods, but that we insisted that the data quality be defined as such. All right, So more information about the system design of the network is shown here. One is that it needed to include various ecosystems. In workshop 1, we focused on the open ocean, coasts, and coral reefs. In this workshop, we've defined that even farther, as you'll see in your book. We also acknowledged, and I think Dick Feely brought this up in his question to Magic, about the various platforms and how different platforms had different data quality as well as capacities for the different quality objectives. And so we discussed the measurements within the context of the platforms. And the third bit about our system design of the network is that it needed an interdisciplinary approach, and that, of course, this will be more effective if integrated a priori, and I think we've all agreed with that, and there's that question that I mentioned really was important to consider. All right, so here's an example of how platforms and data uses were defined by this workshop. So in terms of understanding Goal 1, this is how different platforms at this point in time, or at least at a year ago, are able to either secure weather or climate level data for us, and same for Goal 2. And so that's basically the status of where we are at this moment with technologies that we have at hand. And we thank the X Prize for stimulating more technology development. All right, so moving on, Kathy Koska will be presenting this map directly after my talk. And as you know, this map has been utilized to decide what already exists or what is planned on a global basis. And so another thing we did with the workshop is to consider the spatial and temporal design of the network. And so in looking at that map and in discussing it, we said that on a global scale for the open ocean, many of the building blocks are there. But certainly that the network needed filling in, it needed enhancing, and most critically, it needs sustaining. And anybody who's started a time series knows how important and how difficult that is, that sustaining. On the coasts and the shelf seas, on a global scale, it truly needs construction. There's points of glory here and there, but on a global scale, in terms of understanding our coasts and shelf seas, we really need to be constructing this. There's great systems out there we can leverage, but there are many gaps. And the global design needs to be regionally coordinated and implemented, and that's also not a trivial thing to do and provides the context for much of our discussions this week. Coral reefs, somewhat similar to coasts and shelf seas on a global scale, that needs construction. We've got some building blocks out there. And then, right, okay, and so thinking about where are the gaps here, I think is, I'll suffice to say that for the coast there's many gaps, but here's the SOCAT slide that Dr. Baker showed us earlier, and you can certainly see where our gaps are even in the open ocean. Those get even worse when we start to consider the coastal seas. All right, so there's a lot of detail about the building blocks in this report. When it comes to the ocean, here are some of those building blocks that are important to sustain and to expand upon and to enhance. There's also some technologies that are important for us to be thinking about how to best utilize to develop those, because they offer us some capacities that we can't already do. For the coasts, it really is about creating capacity, and here's some notes on that. Certainly incorporate existing assets, that's pretty easy, but if we are truly going to have a global system, we need to go way beyond that. And going beyond that will really require building some capacity that doesn't exist, for instance, in coastlines of countries that are traditionally under-monitored or under-observed. And so there were some suggestions on how to use analyses to target how we'll do that. As Jane intimated, there's not unlimited resources, so we have to be really prudent. And aimed for balanced representation. we thought about, is it more important to have observations in ecosystems that are already seeing low pHs, high PCO2, because they're even going to be subjected to more extreme events, or might they be better adapted? And so maybe it's more critical to study the stable ecosystems, because as things drop, they might be more susceptible in terms of ecosystem response. And I think the right answer is we need a mix of those. We need to understand the system in a balanced perspective. And then lastly, work within regions to optimize capacity and relevance. And many of our participants said, I don't think you realize how difficult that might be in my country. So I think we really need to be sober about that. Coral reefs, once again, utilizing existing assets, aiming for a balanced representation. And something unique to coral reefs is using areas such as natural CO2 seeps to give us insight into what future systems might look like. All right, so coming back to data sharing, we had another sort of like breakthrough consensus statement that the participants in the network agree to support in principle the construction of a web portal that builds on current capacity and capabilities, accepts data streams from relevant data centers, and I think the importance of data centers and the distributed data centers was really important, provides visual and data link capabilities, and exhibits synthesis products for the ocean scale. And we actually spent some time talking about what some of those synthesis products would be. With respect to QA/QC, we spent a lot of time talking about roadblocks. And in fact, we wrote out roadblocks on sticky notes and pasted them on the walls, collated them, and then did some brainstorming about how to solve some of these. QA/QC takes time. There's lacking capacity. There's not standardized procedures, even if people want to do the right thing. There's reluctance. And so how could we get around those? And so you can read the details, but one of the important things is data managers' role, and to not underestimate how important those are. And I know you had Rob down here saying, please interact with me. And so that's something I think is really central to our addressing that and some of the other ideas that emerged there. So what do we want the outcome of this network to be? Globally distributed, high-quality data, near real-time data, and data synthesis products that can facilitate research, new knowledge on OA, as Jane said, for the science, communicate status of OA and biological response, that helps us mitigate and adapt, and enable forecasting prediction of OA conditions, also that is as well, allowing us to understand how we should be responding. So, but I think what's really critical is to be thinking about the audiences that need this, and that's been mentioned by Jane, by Carol, by Wendy, by several others, that it isn't just the scientists who need this. There's a whole host of other sectors that are needing these data, and that we should be thinking about how we communicate with them. As we think about requirements, oftentimes when you're thinking about observing networks, you think about widgets in the water. But it's people that can provide not only how to operate those, to maintain those, the data QA/QC level in management, the analytical and synthesis activities. We need to be thinking about this in total, and we need to be thinking about how we can distribute that. Sometimes people need to be local, sometimes we can have distributed centers of excellence that provide some of these capacities. And so that should be taken into consideration in terms of how we make this system work, network work. We talked about international coordination. This is a direct quote from the report. I know this figure has been shown several times. I know that that's something that we'll be discussing at this workshop as well. And so thinking about how we organize ourselves in order to do this most effectively. So that's a lot of what happened in Seattle. And Phil and Jeremy and Libby have been thinking really hard about how to take it to the next step. And I really want to acknowledge Phil for all of your hard work and your talent in bringing us to this point today. What is left to do now? First, further vetting of the Workshop 1 conclusions. Do you like what you saw? Not all of you were there. You weren't necessarily part of the 62, or maybe your ideas have changed, but can we live with the recommendations in this report? Or are there critical things that we need to bring up now, flag, discuss, and come to consensus on? The biological observations. What should we define for goals 1 and 2 biological measurements according to the breakout areas that are in our workshop books that you'll be signing up for and discussing for the rest of our workshop? And Phil put this slide up, and I had to chuckle because he was putting this up as his most simplest version of the slide. And I was going to use it to make the point that when we think about biology, it's really complex because it's all of these boxes. It isn't just 1 or 2. So I love how we were using the same slide to communicate very different levels of complexity. International governance structure, as I mentioned. Modeling linkage. You saw that was our 3rd goal. We talked about modeling somewhat. You'll see it reflected in this report, but I think we need to go beyond that and think about how can we make better linkage with modeling, modelers, etc. And then lastly, capacity building. What strategies offer opportunity for expansion to traditionally underobserved locations? That real criticality that it's going to take some real creative thinking and some investments in order to make this happen. So the last slide here is our strategy forward. So our Seattle Workshop report is a step towards providing the strategy for the observing network. This St. Andrews workshop will refine and complete that material, resulting in a plan document. We need to go from a white paper like this to, as some of you have been saying, a thing. We need a plan document that then, that plan, once reviewed and vetted, will be available for hopeful support and implementation globally by countries worldwide. So that's kind of where we've come from, and I think where we're hoping to go. And I thank you and look forward to questions.
Thanks, Jan. Are there any questions?
Jane. Oh, waiting for the...
Jan, thank you for that nice summary of the Seattle workshop, but also for your leadership throughout. As plans are coming together for the plan, I think it's wise to acknowledge that there are going to be lots of surprises and uncertainties in this whole area. There have been so far, there will continue to be. And so it would be, I think, a good idea from the outset to set aside some fraction of resources for being opportunistic, for admitting that there are going to be some things that come across that people will need to follow up on. They may not be at the global scale, they may be locally relevant. But just from the outset, not only to have the expectation of some things that are under development, but to have the expectation that there are some undefined resources just to capitalize on, take advantage of new surprises. They may be rabbit holes, they may never result in something, but they may not be. And if you don't plan that in from the outset, it's hard to be able to jump on it when it happens.
I think those are very wise words, Jane, as usual from you. And I think that it takes some balance to figure out how to make things consistent enough so that we can compare things globally, but also to recognize that the two things you said, there will be surprises, and then also things are different on some local scales than other local scales, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So I think those are very wise philosophies. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we should move on to the next speaker now, Kathy Koska from NOAA PMEL, who is going to show us where all our assets are in the ocean. Thank you.
Great. Hi, I'm Kathy Koska. I work at the NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Lab in Seattle in the CO2 group. And I've worked with Dick Feely and many others in this room for over 20 years now, measuring underway PCO2. I'm also very involved in the SOCAT project, both as a contributor of data and as the regional group lead for the tropical Pacific. And back at the lab, I help with web design for the CO2 group, and last year I was asked to put together a map of ocean acidification platforms for the first GOA-ON workshop in Seattle. And the map has since grown, and a lot more platforms have been added, and I've been asked to give a brief overview of the map. So this slide shows the map embedded in a website that was put together for this workshop, and in this configuration you can click on the map and get information about any of the platforms shown. And if you choose this View Larger Map option here, you'll be brought to a larger map with a very detailed legend. And the map itself is organized into categories of platforms. You can minimize and expand those categories with these buttons. And the categories are moorings, which is further broken down into deployed moorings, which are the red circles on the map. Planned moorings, near term, those will be deployed within the next couple of years. Those are green circles. And proposed moorings, which is useful for long-term planning. Those are also green circles on the map. The yellow triangles are other fixed platforms, such as time series stations, floats, piers, seabed monitoring, etc. The green lines are VOS or SOO cruises, and these platforms include measurements made from ships that don't stop at planned stations. And finally, the blue lines are ship-based time series and hydrographic cruises, and these platforms are measurements made from ships that do stop at planned stations. And these categories can be turned on or off using these boxes here. And for instance, I've turned off the proposed mooring long-term option, and this gives a map that represents just what's actually existing now and planned in the near future. If you choose this option here, you'll get a Google Earth representation of the map, and this map can be spun around. You can view the platforms from any aspect. Now, you can choose any of the individual platforms either from the legend on the left or from the map itself, and when you do that, you'll get an information bubble. And all of the platforms have information about the type of sensor, the organization, the contacts, website, deployment date and duration, and information about the sensors themselves. Here's another example, this time of a ship-based time series. Now, these information bubbles are very readily, they can be readily customized. For instance, we can add links to published data and data products. And an example of how that can be done is shown here for one of the VOS cruises. The published data for this cruise is archived at NODC and at CDAC. So I've added links to both of those. If you click on those links, you'll be taken directly to the archived data. And here it is at CDAC. Since this is an underway cruise, it's also part of the SOCAT data set. So if you click on that link, you'll be brought to the cruise within SOCAT. So for when data products are developed for the ocean acidification measurements being discussed in this workshop, links can very readily be added to the information bubbles for all of these different platforms. Now, the integrity of this map depends on accurate and current information, and the best way to add platforms to the map or update platforms that already exist is to follow this link to a form that can be filled out and submitted. And of course, I'm going to be at the workshop for the next 3 days, so please come and see me if you know of platforms that you'd like added or modified to the map. The map here on this website is the most current version, and it will continue to be updated. It was updated as recently as this morning. And this map can be linked or embedded into any website. And to do that, you would choose this View Larger Map link and then choose the little link icon at the top. And that will provide the URL for a link in that box and a little piece of HTML code that can be copied and pasted into any website. And the map can be customized a little bit by choosing that option, and once you're happy with the way it looks, the piece of HTML code to copy and embed into a website will appear here, and you'll get something that looks like this. And the really nice thing about the Google format is that these are live links, so as the map is updated and added to, any link or embedded map in a website will automatically reflect the most current version of the map. I'm also providing a PDF version of the map here, and that's not a live link, but it will be updated on a regular basis, and there will be a timestamp in the title of the map. So to conclude, the map is a visual representation of ocean acidification platforms and an interactive portal to information about the various platforms. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Are there any questions? I have one. What the green squiggly lines,
Yes.
say south of Africa, what are they just one-off cruises?
Well, the map was created based on input from the participants at the Seattle workshop. So the idea is to have VOS cruises that are, that's a good question. I guess we should decide if we want VOS cruises that are just one-time cruises or if they should be repeat cruises to be part of this network map. That's a great question, and I think maybe we can hopefully resolve that during this workshop. Yes, Dorothy?
Dorothy Bucker, University of Anglia. I guess I have a similar question. Which hydrographic cruises do you include, and do you, how long do you keep data on there? Do platforms on there need to be operational, or will you at some stage update it?
No, that was not the intent of when it was first created. It was basically a map of any platform that has OA measurements. So several of the platforms here, some of the VOS cruises, like the one that I showed, is no longer in operation, but OA measurements were made from that platform.